Navigating Europe's betting regulations. Compliance in the age of AI.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to see the most persistent of you, the most committed of you, to come here this morning. And hello again, Mauro, Giulio.
Good morning. Hello.
Thanks for joining us. Okay, so our today's panel is titled Navigating Europe's Betting Regulations, Compliance in the Age of AI. Before we start, let's do a short round of intros. I'm going to get the ball rolling. My name is Eugene Ravden. Now I work for SEO Brothers as head of PR, but my background is media. I used to be a football journalist and sports editor, so I'm much more used to ask questions, not answer them. And this will be my role today. Mauro.
So I'm Mauro Miceli. I'm currently the operations director with BetStarters. BetStarters are mainly platform providers in emerging markets, but my background has always been in operations, and before this role I was head of operations as well with a subsection of Betway, where we worked in very regulated markets, especially in Europe as well. So my feedback for this discussion will mainly be on the hands-on approach that operators usually feel in the industry and the issues with regulation, under, over-regulation, etc.
Thank you. Giulio.
Hi, I'm Giulio Coraggio. I'm the head of the global gambling practice at the global law firm DLA Piper. So basically, we advise clients on expanding in different markets, on M&A transactions globally, and that's it.
Okay, so we have the operator side, we have the legal side, and let's get started. Let's start with a broader question, just so we are all on the same level and the audience know what we're talking about. So where are we now? Where do we stand? I mean, what is the current role of AI in betting regulation and compliance? Giulio, would you please start?
Well, the gambling industry has never been very innovative, mainly because of regulations that are restrictive, and sometimes innovation is driven by regulations. The area where we've seen more the usage of AI so far is in responsible gambling, in order to identify players with gambling addictions. But the potentials are limitless, for instance, in relation to marketing initiatives. But then the problem for operators is to find the right balance between exploiting artificial intelligence and avoiding any sort of over exploitation, which might trigger a sort of abuse of the potential weaknesses of players, fostering gambling addiction. So on the one hand, AI can help to protect players. On the other hand, it can be a way of pushing them to gamble more, and obviously responsible gambling principles are a good restriction, a strong restriction in operations.
If I can add a point to this, I think the AI regulation that came into force earlier this year in Europe is the first step in having a European thing to do with gaming. And I think yesterday, who attended the keynote speech by the president of the European, Roberta Metsola, who's Maltese like me, so we'd like to mention her quite a bit. Her first point was that we need to have a common European framework when it comes to gambling regulations around the European Union. And I think the new regulation with AI is the first step that deals with the gambling sector and having a common framework around Europe. So I think it's the first step to get there.
But do you think it is even possible? Because sometimes it seems that it's so hard for the countries to find common ground these days. Do you foresee such a framework working for all the European countries? Because everybody wants something different for themselves.
At the moment, no. At the moment, for sure not. So every regulator, and I think we're in Europe today, nearly every country has its own regulations and regulators being changed, as we said in the beginning, quarterly, every half a year. There are new regulations coming out that operators need to lead to. That has a number of issues that maybe we can go into a bit later, both financial, but even the way businesses work, the way they operate. The fact that you need to have different platform setups to work in different European countries is having two main issues, I think. Having startups, new businesses who could do things a bit differently, not looking to work in a European regime because it is extremely difficult to work with. And secondly, you are being left with very limited companies, being 20, 25, 30 large companies today that are running everything that it can do in Europe, because it is too expensive to have new companies having multiple licenses around Europe.
Yeah, I do agree. And actually, the position of the European Commission is that gambling is within the jurisdiction of each single member state. You may have noticed that the decisions of the European Court of Justice on gambling-related matters are becoming more and more rare because they want to avoid creating frictions in an area that they believe it's under jurisdiction of each single member state. On what Mauro was saying, with the UAI Act, we are creating some sort of harmonization that is impacting also gambling, because, for instance, AI systems used in gambling, if they exploit weaknesses of players, they could even become prohibited AI systems. So we have non-gambling related provisions that are harmonized and are applicable to gambling. On that area, I foresee a better harmonization, but as to the licensing regime, it's very difficult.
I agree completely.
Okay, let's try to dwell a little bit deeper into this attempt to bring forward a common legal framework in the European Union. I'm talking about EU AI Act, European Union AI Act, which has been in the making for several years now. So what's your take on this? Can you predict what impact it will have on European iGaming?
I start. Yeah, I mean, most of the EU regulators are obliging obliging gambling operators to put in place AI systems to limit gambling addiction. But that would be mainly a low-risk AI system. At the same time, if the AI doesn't work, then there is a sort of risk of a boomerang effect. Because if there is an over-reliance on AI and players are generating some sort of addiction and then they lose a lot, then there is a risk of claims for the reimbursement of money. On the other hand, if AI is used to to exploit, to market the services, then it would be either a high-risk AI solution or even a prohibited AI solution. On that point, unfortunately, the AI Act is a regulation, so it should be directly applicable in each single member state, but most of the European countries still don't have an AI authority, even though the provisions on prohibited AI systems are already in place. But even the provisions on sanctions are not in place. So, I mean, and at the same time, we have the pressure from the US in lifting some of the norms that are not yet applicable. So it seems very confusing at the moment.
I won't go into the technicalities of the AI, because I'm not the expert here, but the whole aim of it when it comes into the gambling industry, from the bit that I know of the regulation, is that is all around player safety. And when we're speaking on regulation in the EU, especially now on a European regulation, anything that is all based around player safety, which is important to have. It's important to have time to have regulations in space. And there are very big, if they are enforceable, and probably Joe can have a little bit more, there are very high penalties that can be put on people who go against these regulations. If I'm not mistaken, last I read was 7% of total revenue, which for large companies in the industry can be very high amounts. So the will is there. It's, as was said, are we going to implement it well or not now?
Yeah, I think that links to the point that you mentioned before. There is a strong aggregation in the gambling industry. Literally, the market is in the hands of no more than 10 companies, 10 groups rather than companies, and that should make compliance more relevant, because the potentials of fines that are calculated on the group, they would be very severe. So a lower number of companies are easier to control. At the same time, we have the black market that is still a threat. And I mean, the unlicensed market is still growing, and these companies will have to be controlled in a way or another.
Big legal changes are also coming in Italy, where as of November 12th, a new licensing system will be in place, which also requires the operators to use AI for responsible gambling. How will that work, and how would that shape the dynamics of the industry, apart from the fact that you mentioned that there's now a much lower quantity, a much lower number of the operator brands in place? What else?
Well, it is true. On the 12th of November, the new regime will become applicable. It's also true that the technical requirements under the new regime will become applicable after 6 months. So probably on the 12th, no much is going to happen. What is going to happen with the new technical rules is that this is going to be part of the requirements to be met. The way AI will have to be implemented in the operations is still gray, because apart from the reference to the usage of AI for responsible gambling, the regulations don't go much deeper than that. Obviously, if you use AI and that AI is a generative AI system, you will have the provisions of the AI Act to comply with. But what is sufficient to reach the threshold under the new regime is still unclear. I do believe that the regulator, on the one hand, wanted to have the provision open and flexible to avoid that it was becoming too burdensome for operators, especially small operators. At the same time, probably there wasn't a full understanding of the potentials and how in practice it had to be implemented. So what shall I do with AI? The risk scoring, shall I monitor any activity that players do on the platform, or shall it be part of like AML checks? Shall I monitor the source of funds of players? I mean, responsible gambling and AML checks are in some way interconnected.
I think, let's be clear, I think it's common, it's known. Everything or most of the platforms available out there all use AI for one thing or another anyways. If you're doing your, as we said before, the AML, KYC checks, ensuring the funds from where they're coming in, all these are done to get the results that we need as fast as possible. It is all done through AML. So it's all done, through AI. And we are doing it, and it is being done by everyone today. So yes, the regulation is important to have. The issues when it comes to regulations, like when there are in Italy, is when you set, I think, thresholds too high. And this happens, or let us say it is happening, I think, in a number now of not just Italy, but in a number of European regulations that are coming through in a number of jurisdictions, where it is being made impossible or very difficult, let me use a different term, for new players to enter the market. If we take Italy, for example, where up till last year, I believe, where there were around 90, 100 operators working, if not more. With the new regulations coming into place, it is calculated that in Italy we'll have, I believe, approximately 30 to 40 operators being applicable to work because of the high costs on getting the license. It's on the technical requirements that are needed, making it that you need to have a very big, strong workforce in place to reach these regulations. And this is where over-regulation is hindering, I think, competition as well. So it is important to have regulations in place. It is important to have regulations, but it is also keeping in mind that we need to have a level playing field for all different partners and people who do want to still enter the market. So I don't want to come to a point whereby in European regulations we're at a time sometimes, and I saw this mainly in my previous job, you start having a race between, let's put it this way, a race between regulators who's making the most stringent regulations, which is not the point of the regulations. It's, I believe regulation should be there to ensure a fair playing field between everyone.
Yeah, I mean, a big deterrent in getting a license is also the gambling advertising ban, because basically if both licensed and unlicensed operators cannot advertising, the attractiveness of the regulated market is more limited, and besides, catching an unlicensed operator is more complicated than issuing a fine against a licensed operator. I do agree that the cost is a big issue. In Italy, we switched from a cost of the license of 350,000 euros to 7 million. It's true that it's the second largest gambling market in Europe. And if we had 40 operators getting the license, it means that they think they're going to make a profit. While in the past, out of the 90 operators you mentioned, many of them were very small and were operating in a sort of gray market. So, I mean, if the market is more costly, then also the enforcement against unlicensed operators needs to be quite careful, and at the same time you need to make the licensed market attractive in terms of advertising. I need to do advertising, but I need to do it properly. If I'm too aggressive, it's fine to be fined, but just prohibiting everything is not regulating.
Okay, Mauro, you have a very interesting angle, because at some point you switched from working for a big operated, regulated operator, Betway, to a startup. So tell us please a little bit about your hands-on experience, the biggest challenges that you faced after that move.
So I think coming from the Betway side of things is having continuously teams of people working on ensuring that you always remain compliant. Regulations come in, changes. So I've worked in regulated markets like Germany, Spain, Italy, Malta as well, the UK, which is extremely regulation. And it's always getting your platform updated. Just, for example, with the UK GC regulations in May, June, we had to change our whole, it's all based around player safety, and that is extremely important, and we always have to keep it in mind. But for example, having to change our whole platform setup because of how you mark, where before you could When you go on the platform, you choose if you want to have email, SMS, or calls. Now, in the UK, for example, they added another step whereby you choose if it's for casino, if it's sportsbook, if it's lottery. It's lottery for. And it might seem simple out there, but it takes a lot of work to be done on the platforms and at the back end, and to have the data systems in place to ensure you remain compliant. Because all you need is one complaint from someone to the regulator, and the fines and costs are big. Today, now I've moved to a much smaller company. We work mainly in emerging markets, and while you still, and I still do ensure that we are completely required to regulation, to player safety, to AML checks, to KYC, to ensuring source of funds. Those are key imperatives that, for me, in any business or in any operator you are with, are things that you need to have and that you need to ensure that you are doing, because it also works on the reputation of the business that you are with. But not having so stringent regulations in the markets where we are working in, so we are at the moment working in emerging markets, mainly in Africa and also in LATAM, Liberia, Nigeria, Mozambique, Peru, Chile, in these countries, whereby you can have a limited flexibility as well, whereby with a platform that is compliant to certain minimum regulations, you can go there, you can operate, and you can compete. And it is a free market. We will never be a Betano, a Bet365, for example, but the market is there to compete anymore. It does not hinder competition coming in from new players. And I think this is where what bothers me the most in being overregulated, that it is making it not impossible, but very difficult to compete. And I think it is the way that most startups, most businesses are looking for. They're looking at the emerging markets, they are in there, they build an amount of capital, an amount of money, to then be able to see if what they have, if the platform that they have is good enough to get the people they need, to get the retention, to get the acquisition that they need. And then once they have a basic, solid foundation, it is then that they are looking to Europe and to the or let us put it, to the more regulated markets. Keeping it in mind, if like a lot of operators use the Curaçao license, a number of changes are coming into Curaçao at the moment, making it much more stringent on what should be done, which is good. It is important that these markets and these regulations keep being updated. So let us keep in mind. So even these licenses, Curaçao, Anjouan, Kanawaki, are licenses that are being updated currently and are making it not as easy, let's put it this way, to have.
I agree that these emerging markets are becoming very attractive. Regulations are not mature in those countries, but they still have the minimum that allows to protect players. Maybe in Europe we should kind of learn how to make regulations more competitive, kind of limiting some barriers. In the past we've seen some joint agreements between regulators in setting similar parameters or in mutual recognition of technical standards. We haven't seen that anymore recently. And as we mentioned at the beginning, there isn't any possibility of having a single gambling regulation across Europe. But to make Europe more attractive, we should work on consistency. And Africa is a great opportunity where I can see that there are some consistencies between one country and the other. So we are probably because they are building regulations. Yeah.
I think just to comment with this, and when as we're speaking on mainly European regulations, I think while we will never have a common European license, I do think there should be some flexibility between license regulators around Europe to have at least common frameworks. And I think that is where we have to arrive. I don't think anyone is expecting that, at least in the near future, to have a common European regulation, but at least to have common features and making it easier to work in different European countries, I think can be done.
Look, I wanted to take a step back and to ask you to give me an example. You told that while working for the Betway, you had a whole department of people doing compliance every day. I just want to understand the scale. How big was that department and how many people do this job for BetStarters today, just to compare?
No problem. I think the work, let us remember, the work is not done by the compliance team. The compliance team are there to tell us that this regulation is out there, we need to get it done, and then you have a whole tech team that needs to change the platform. And you had a tech team of over 80 people at a particular time working okay on different regulations. But you had two persons, usually one person having two different regulations that is following, unless they're the big ones. So like MGA, you had one person responsible for the MGA. Another person was responsible for the UKGC, which was a large market for it, on the compliance side. And then you have a project team that has a project manager that leads with the tech teams, etc., all together to get the updates that need to be done. On the other hand, as BetStarters, which is a startup, it's a small country, I mean, the whole office is, I would say, approximately 20, 25 people, with having a compliance team that includes compliance, customer service, tech, operations side from my end, sales, because we do need to sell, that's how we get our money. So it is completely different, and I still believe that because of the markets that let us keep in mind it's also different because we are platform providers, so we provide the services and the necessary licenses and turnkey solutions to partners, whereby Betway is an operator, so obviously it is more stringent on its own platform. But we do have teams as well, a tech team at our end, who ensures that our platform is always compliant with what we are working, or the needs to, because any partner that we get on who wants our platforms is always requests certain different things to the platform that needs to be done. That is why, well, that's what makes I believe our platform a bit more interesting than others, the fact that it is very flexible while keeping all the main license regulations that are needed.
Yeah, if I may add, the function of compliance for a gambling operator is not just to flag that there might be an issue, because that's quite easy. Before this session, we spoke about prediction markets, and so the value added that compliance can give is to adapt, to see how regulations can adapt to new products. Like prediction markets are basically not regulated in any jurisdiction worldwide, and so we are advising clients on how they can fit within the framework of their jurisdiction, because probably the US version of prediction markets cannot be copied and pasted. If I fall under the regime of financial services, no gambling operator will be able to actually offer it. So we need, compliance needs to be seen as a value added to the company rather than an issue to be overcome, which is tough sometimes.
Okay, our time is running out, so let's wrap it up with really quick fire answers to a not so quick fire question. So for me, it seems that like you told, the market becomes less fragmented. There are more bigger players and less players in general. But does it make the market more transparent or no? Because, I mean, you could suggest that less players means more visibility and more transparency. Is that really so?
If you ask me, I don't think so, because the same work you need for one player is the same work you need for 100. You do the same checks are necessary according to how much the players want, according to KYC regulations, etc. So having one, having 100 is going to take exactly the same amount of work.
Thank you. Julio, you have the honor to wrap it up.
I think it's easier to control because the market is in the hands of a more limited number of players, and this is the intent of regulators, because a lower number of players are more financially sound. You don't have any more cases where the money of players all of a sudden disappear. Yeah, it's easier to these markets are easier to control. I don't know whether they are more compliant, because at the end of the day, everyone needs to make money. Everyone needs to exploit the gray areas within regulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us here, for listening and having a look.
Thank you.
Mauro, Giulio, it's been a pleasure.